Good morning, everyone. I'm Asha Nayaswami, and we're going to have a class this morning on discipleship, which we're calling it now Pathway to Self-Transcendence. So let's begin with a prayer. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master, Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, humbly we bow to all. Help us to open our hearts, that we may be inspired first by love, by joy, by a desire for truth, to focus our consciousness on attunement with your presence, that everything we do will be guided and inspired by your divine wisdom. Om, peace. Amen. I'm going to begin with Keshava doing a little chanting for us. Why don't you do two?
Okay.
That works.
Mm-hmm. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Wilt thou come, just for once come to me? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Will my days fly away without seeing thee, my Lord? Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Night and day, I look for thee night and day. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Door of my heart, open wide I keep for thee. Wilt thou about seeing thee, my Lord. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day. Night and day, night and day, I look for thee, night and day.
Let's meditate for just a couple of minutes. Om. Peace. Amen. In the in the last years of, just a moment, I have to clear my throat. In the last years of Swami Kriyananda's life, and like certainly the last 5 or 6 years, and very, very noticeably in the last couple of years, pretty much whatever the announced topic was, very quickly Swami would start telling the story of meeting Master, of how he felt before he became a disciple, what it was like to meet Master, what it meant to him, how he sat in front of him and the first words he spoke were, "I want to be your disciple," and how much Swamiji had to go through in his life before he had the wisdom and the humility to be able to do that. And every time Swami would tell the story, especially in the last few years, he would just weep. And then he would try to master himself and he would barely be able to do it. And those of us who had been more accustomed to Swamiji expounding on the teachings and sort of offering us this multi-sided story of the path, it became a teaching in itself to see that after 60 years of discipleship, the only thing he wanted, the 60 years of being a devotee and being a disciple, and learning these teachings and sharing them with the world and all that he'd accomplished, all he wanted to tell us about over and over again was meeting Master. And that itself became the teaching. That how, and by this time, of course, Swamiji is a world-renowned figure. Thousands of people look to him. He's written 150 books. They've been translated by that time into 30 or 40 languages. They were distributed in 100 countries. So you think about that. You think some book of his on leadership or secrets of happiness or education for life. Somebody in Poland is reading it in Polish. Somebody in Taiwan is reading it in their native language. It's in Belgium, being read in there. It's in France. It's in some African countries. It's in Arabic. And some soul somewhere is picking up this book and having often a life-changing experience from what they're reading here. All of it emanating from this point that was called Swami Kriyananda, out like this. And the accolades, heaped upon him, you would think would mean something to him. But all he ever wanted to talk about was how he met Master and became a disciple. It wasn't even that he wanted to talk about his life of accomplishment as a disciple. He just wanted to talk about that connecting link. And by his own statement, somebody asked him once, of all the things that you've done, what do you think is your greatest accomplishment? His first answer was, well, I don't feel like I've done anything. And then the person looked puzzled because there was this huge body of work behind him. He said, Master has done it through me. God has acted through me. I don't feel like I've done any of it myself. And he said, but quite apart from that, he said, the only thing that matters to me, and the only question I feel God will ask me after I pass, is, have you been a good disciple? And he says, and with all my heart, I pray that the answer to that is yes. In another context, he said, when he dies and meets Master again, he imagines Master saying to him, have you loved me? Do you love me? And Swami's answer will be, he said, you are all I have ever loved. So when you see, and I want to add one more part to this, because of the way devotees tend to get involved with their own masters and the pure revelation of a master gradually gets shifted from revelation into religion. One of the things that, out of devotion, that the disciple often wants to do is we want to be able to see bigger and bigger how magnificent the Guru was. Swamiji at a particular, it might have been in the year 1993 when we were celebrating Master's centennial, since he was born in 1893. It may have been at that, but it was for some big occasion relating to Master. Swamiji gave a talk, and he said it's common among disciples to speak of their own Guru as the greatest. And Swami said, and he was introducing, and I'm about to talk about Master, and it's easy for me to feel he was the greatest. He said, but when I'm saying that, I'm not really trying to compare him to any other. I'm not saying compared to this he was better, compared to that one he was better. He said, it's just when you are a disciple and you're, these are not Swami's words, but this was the meaning of what he said. And every day of your life, you realize that you owe everything to your Guru's grace. He said, it's impossible not to believe that that Guru was the greatest gift to humanity, because he's been the greatest gift to me. And so Swami sort of apologized in advance. He said, I'm not trying to be chauvinistic here. He said, but I have no other way of speaking about my Master except in superlatives. And so what happens is, especially when the revelation becomes somewhat institutionalized, and Swamiji has worked very hard to keep this from happening at Ananda, but there are other Yogananda organizations in which the focus on him as a unique entity has been very strong. We gradually begin to project on the Master the attitudes we have about him. And this is what you see in the life of Christ above all, where, Jesus Christ is the only one and the only way to salvation because of things Jesus himself said, like, I am the way, the truth, and the light, and no one comes unto the Father except through me. That seems to have a pretty obvious definition, depending, however, on how he was using the pronoun I. In the Indian tradition and in the Bhagavad Gita and all through the scriptures, the avatar will use the pronoun I, but it doesn't mean the unique body that avatar is inhabiting at that moment, because he himself, when he says I, does not mean that body. He means the infinite consciousness that flows through that body. So when he says I, he means the infinite. In the life of Jesus, if you look at it carefully, sometimes he calls himself the Son of God, and sometimes he calls himself the Son of Man. And Master said when he was speaking of the Son of Man, he meant this particular incarnation, Jesus. When he called himself the Son of God, or when he used the pronoun I in a transcendent way, it meant the divine power flowing through him. So I am the way means that God is the only way, that the Christ consciousness within you, the realization of that within you, because that was who Jesus meant when he said I. However, what happens is we try to make that individual Master unique in all creation. I remember a devoted Christian friend was trying to clarify to me that her relationship to Jesus was not narrow. It was absolute, but it was not narrow. And she used this phrase, I don't believe that revelation began and ended with Jesus. His was a true revelation, but there had been others before and there would be others after, which would be exactly the right attitude for a disciple. So going to where I was heading here, in the path, Swami tells an extremely touching story about Master. Now, Master is, he's a great avatar. He's this enormous guru in his own right. He's accomplished everything that he was sent to the West to accomplish. And one of his disciples, who was a very humble man and very limited resources, the way that Swami tells the story, the man gathered fallen walnuts from the side of the road where there were some walnut trees that weren't tended. He gathered the walnuts, sold the walnuts, and with it bought yarn, and then made a needlepoint picture of Sri Yukteswar, which he presented to Master. And Master was so touched by the man's devotion, by his care, and it's actually a beautifully done piece, that he hung it right outside his room. And Swamiji said every time he went past it, Yogananda would pranam like this. And in his own life, Yogananda himself passed the credit upwards. He never said, I, the great Guru, am doing this through my master, meaning Sri Yukteswar, or from Babaji, or from God himself. In fact, Swami again tells a story in the path where Master was having a very informal lunch with a group of devotees and with a group of guests. And one of the guests said to Master, Dr. Lewis was your first disciple in America, isn't that true? And Master became rather distant and said, so they say. And it seemed such an odd answer. The guest was discomforted by that, felt perhaps she'd done something wrong. And so Master explained. He said, I never think of anyone as my disciple. He said that God is the only Guru. So there's this profound humility that the true instrument of God always has, because there's no self to take credit with all of this. And yet on the other side, it behooves us who are the recipients of this to respond with total and complete gratitude. And so it's a balancing act that we all have to work with, which is the instrument for our salvation, whether it's Master himself or Swamiji as Master's instrument. The instrument for our salvation of necessity must be revered by us. And it's not like it's a dogma that it should be revered. It's the spontaneous response of a grateful heart. I think of it sometimes as if we're all trying to become concert pianists. You know, in the end, if you're that kind of musician, you're on the stage or you're in your practice room, it's your hands on the piano, and you have to be able to play. You have to be able to do it. But what you're doing is you're bringing through the music. And it's the music is the point. You're just the fingers that enable that music to come through. And if you've been gifted with a great teacher, you understand that I would never be able to put my hands on the keys and play like this if my teacher hadn't shown me how to do it. But both of us are devoted to the music and devoted to the same goal, which is that we can become perfect instruments of the music. But it would be a very unrefined person who almost by definition would not be able to be a great musician, who didn't humbly lay their success at the feet of the one who trained them. But you can see all the different elements. And then, of course, how did that teacher become a great teacher? Because someone trained him. And his own nature would have to be, I'm just an instrument. It's not really I who's doing it. So all of this teaches us both how to regard the master and also how to think of ourselves in relationship to it. Which is why it was so helpful and so deeply touching to hear the way Swami would talk about it. Because he accomplished so much and yet knew for a fact that he had done none of it. He just knew it. And anyone who is an instrument for true creativity has that same feeling. It happens. When I do it, it doesn't come out as well. It's just as simple as that. I remember when I was learning to write, which was a decades-long project, and Swami never let me off the hook. he would give me assignments and I would try to execute them, and then I would be more or less successful. I remember at a period of time, for a while, he thought he wanted me to write children's books. I think he was just trying to find something I could do. And I wrote one story, and it was a pretty nice story. And I carried it as it happened. He was in Assisi, and I carried it to Europe, and I gave it to him to read. And it's very funny. Whenever I would hand something to Swamiji, I would immediately understand what it was. I could never understand it. I mean, literally, if I would push send on the email, as soon as I would push send, I could see what I'd done in proper proportion. But I could never see it until I pushed send. So there would always be a second one, almost always be a second one, because suddenly I would see how it could be better. But I showed him this story, and Swami said, "It's very nice." And I had read it to a number of other people, and it was a very nice story. But the phrase he used was, he said, "It's mental." And I mean, it wasn't a mental story. It wasn't like an intellectual story. But I'd created it out of my own mind. And as soon as he characterized that, I knew exactly what he meant. I'd thought it through and written it. It wasn't that I didn't channel it. It was done by me. And because I had sufficient talent, it was an okay story. He sort of shrugged and said, "You can publish it if you want to," which I never did, of course, because I knew I shouldn't. I didn't want to. I didn't feel it. It wasn't the end point of my exercise. But then when I began, after all that training, to stop doing it myself, then everything began to shift. But this is what it is to be a disciple. Swamiji said at the end of his life, much before the end of his life, he made the comment after he wrote The Essence of Self-Realization. I always like to pull out the books. After he wrote The Essence of Self-Realization, these are always old copies that I have, that was the sayings of Master that he gathered when Master was living. He said after he wrote that book, he said that his thoughts have become so unified with Master that he can't tell what are his thoughts and what are Master's thoughts. There was no self to interfere anymore, and that was 1990. So it was, most of Swami's life. I feel that way before also. When he wrote The Path, of course, that's how he felt also. Now, that in a sense is just by way of introduction. Oh, I know what I was saying. We changed the title of this morning. It was called before Discipleship is a Way of Life. But I called it Discipleship, a Path to Self-Transcendence. And so all of that I'm talking about is setting setting the right understanding for how this takes place. That discipleship is the key. And Sanatana Dharma tells us that it's simply not possible to realize God without the intercession of a guru. And that's an idea that a lot of people rebel against. I can have a direct relationship with God. Why do I need a guru? Well, it's been the principle of the Indian teaching for eons of time, and we have to ask ourselves, from what perspective do I declare that that teaching is no longer valid? But I'm not going to go there very long. In the tradition of Master, when Master was living, Master would initiate people as disciples, often very early in their relationship to him. Swamiji was initiated as a disciple by Master when he first met him, at their very first meeting. Swami was initiated as a disciple, because it's quite possible to recognize one's relationship with the Guru instantaneously. It's not necessary. Meaning, it's not necessarily a sign that you're not a disciple if there's no instantaneous recognition. More people awaken to it gradually than recognize it instantly. But it is possible to realize that this is a relationship that has been in existence long before I came into this body, meaning for many lifetimes before, and one is simply renewing. One is not creating, one is renewing. So Master would recognize that and would initiate people as disciples directly. After Master died, it became the policy that discipleship initiation became combined with taking, excuse me, I'm sorry, I'm having trouble with my throat. I sometimes do. That discipleship became combined with initiation into Kriya Yoga. Now, Kriya Yoga is a technique of meditation. It's a very specific technique, and it's not beneficial. One needs a certain background, one needs a certain established meditation practice, one needs to be doing several other, what you might call foundational techniques that make it possible for you to do the Kriya technique and understand what you're doing. It's like mathematics. One thing builds on another, or learning a new language. You can't just dive in at the end point. You have to have a certain preparation in order to be able to understand what you're doing. So Kriya Yoga, except in exceedingly rare instances, could not be given at the first meeting. That there would have to be certain criteria that you would have to meet before you would qualify for that initiation. That criteria requires a degree of self-discipline, a degree of specific practice, and you have to really apply yourself to it. A person can do that in a matter of 6 months, but there are many people who are deeply devoted to this path and deeply devoted to God and Guru who are simply not disciplined, or not disciplined at that time, not yet sufficiently disciplined to do the practices necessary to be able to receive the Kriya initiation. But many of those people may know in their hearts that they belong to this path. But that the tradition that developed where you couldn't receive the confirmation of your discipleship until you qualified for Kriya took away from people what was a beautiful and meaningful opportunity. And also, the capacity to become a disciple is also what gives you the power and the incentive to do what you need to do to also take Kriya. So Swamiji followed the same policy at Ananda after he started Ananda in 1968. And he kept that in place until the early 80s. And then it occurred to him, because what happened was he was in Rome, and a group of 30 devotees who were charismatic Catholics, but had also read Autobiography of a Yogi, and they came to meet him as a direct disciple with the hope that he would initiate them into Kriya. But he couldn't initiate them into Kriya because they hadn't done any of the preliminary practices, and it wouldn't have served them to just offer them the technique without there being an appropriate foundation. And yet it was clear that by their sincerity and the depth of their highly developed spirituality, that they needed and deserved and merited something from him. And then, of course, he remembered that Master didn't wait until you qualified for Kriya. Master looked into your heart, and if he knew that this was your path, he confirmed you as a disciple. So when Swamiji prayed, literally in front of this group, inwardly he prayed, Master, what should I do? He felt Master say, do as I did. And so Swami, on the spot, created a tradition that was closer to Master's and initiated them all as disciples. And Swamiji would initiate in Master's name. It's also worth knowing that even when Master was alive, Master had Swamiji initiate disciples of Master, but Swamiji would be the touch. Because when the disciple has transcended himself, he acts for the Master. So from that point, Swamiji decided that he wanted to restore the way Master had done things. And so he wrote a vow for disciples, which is what I wanted to come to. And just so you know, that's where this vow comes from. It's something that Swamiji himself wrote. I don't actually have clearly in front of me what words Master used. Maybe, I don't know what those words might be. They're probably available somewhere. But the vow that Swami wrote is actually rather long, and it's the saga of the soul's long journey. And I'm not sure whether I'll go over the whole vow, but there's parts of it that seem very relevant in understanding what discipleship is. It begins by the usual prayer that we say with the different ways that we love God, Father, Mother, Friend, Beloved. And then it enumerates this line of gurus. Even when Master was living, he put his picture on the altar and said he was in this line of gurus, but he never separated himself out. He never said, I am the one. The guru preceptors and this line of masters, Babaji, Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, Jesus Christ, Paramhansa Yogananda. And so this whole lineage of masters is behind us. And you see, people get confused. Well, I'm devoted to Jesus. How can I be devoted to Master? It's Babaji who calls me. Why is Jesus on the altar? But if you think of them all as just clear glass through which the same sun shines, and it's perfectly appropriate if pink or red or yellow is your favorite color, but all you're doing is going through that window, looking out at the same view. Literally, they're all windows like this, and when you can stand at any one of those windows, what you see on the other side is the same, no matter which window you're looking through. And if one window appeals to you more, we also have to realize, and I know people get confused by this, that Jesus won't like it if I'm too devoted to Master, or Master will be hurt if I look instead to Babaji. And so we take our own narrow-minded self-interest and project it onto the Masters, and we also project upon them the definition of the pronoun I, which is our definition, which is that being based upon the body that we inhabit, by that very definition, it excludes every other body. So if we're dedicated to the face of Master, we think that means that we can't be, that somehow we're not equally dedicated to the face of Jesus. Now I know in the tradition of India, and we say it, that we have a destined guru, and that guru is our guru over lifetimes, and that guru takes us to freedom. I don't know exactly how to reconcile that, because I hear people use that to confuse themselves, because Master also gave us a line of gurus. And Master himself, Swami said, that Master's actual guru was Babaji. And Yogananda was Arjuna, and Babaji was Krishna. And that's among the reasons why Master is uniquely qualified to interpret the Gita. But Babaji told Sri Yukteswar, I am going to send you someone to train. And Sri Yukteswar said to Master, you are the one that Babaji sent me. When Master was alive, he had Swamiji initiating on his behalf. Swamiji himself, not at the beginning, but toward the end of his life, well, actually starting in the 90s, he had to accept, is how Swami put it, that he was a necessary link between not all of us at Ananda, but many of us. And he was very clear to say that. For many of you, I am the necessary channel for you to get to Master. And Master said to Swamiji these words, you will be more than a teacher, you will have spiritual responsibility for people. And it was quite clear that Swamiji took spiritual responsibility for us. Now, how does that relate to Master? I've never actually, I have no answer to that. But I learned to play the piano from Swami. And Swami tells me that he was acting only on Master's behalf. And I say, fine. That was always my attitude toward it. It was like, if Swamiji wants to say, I'm acting only on Master's behalf, Master is the guru, I say, wonderful, and Master is my guru. But what do I know about Master except what Swami taught me? So to me, it's the way I often said it when they were living. When people would raise the question to me, I would say, I leave it to them to sort out. It's pretty obvious to me, I know where my devotion goes. And the mere fact that I have this great devotion for Swamiji and have always had it, and would not be on this path if it weren't for Swamiji. If that devotion passes through him to Master, which it often does, that's wonderful. But there's no competition among them, and so I'm not going to create competition in my own heart or exclusiveness one way or another. I just have to be sincere in the path that I follow. So Swamiji here, so I felt like, well, here, this is the other part that I love when I was thinking about this. There's a part in the Bible, let me think, I may not have all the exact details straight, but this is it. It's with Jesus. Jesus, let's see. I'm just trying to. Now I can't remember the details, but this is the end of it. I believe Jesus healed a blind man. And after the man was healed, for some reason there was whether Jesus wanted to take credit for it or not. So Jesus was trying to have this man not give him the credit. And the blind man said to Jesus, who had put his hands on him and healed him of his blindness, because Jesus had been the instrument for the gift, he had absolute faith in Jesus and basically said, then show me who is responsible and I will worship him. Meaning, I have had the experience of you, and if you send me here, then I will go there. Because this I know, and therefore whatever else you say, I trust. And that was how I always felt about Swami. If he tells me that this is his relationship to me, this is his relationship to what I've received from him, that it's all from Master and that's where the credit goes, fine with me. What difference does it make to me? I have my doorway to freedom. So, anyway, this vow starts as it starts, and then here's the first paragraph of this. Divine Mother, I come before thee today, having long sought thy eternal light, long pondered the eternal truths, long followed the winding path that leads to thee. So he starts out the discipleship vow by telling us that this is not something that happens lightly or easily. This is not just, we do not merit, the profound blessing of a God-realized Master if our interest is merely casual. And nowadays it's very funny. It's funny how fads and trends go. When I started out on the spiritual path in the 70s, it was a wholly different world than the world we're living in now. But loyalty and depth was highly prized. I become a disciple of, and I stay there. Swami Kriyananda became a disciple of Master, and he stayed there. Now I observe, when I read people's resumes and so on, the more ashrams you've studied in, and the more initiations you've taken, the more important you apparently are. Now, I might be misreading this from very superficial, but in the time that I started, you wouldn't be proud of having visited 15 ashrams and been part of it. But now it shows how broad and expansive your learning is. Now, each of those kinds of initiations are not on the level that we're talking about here when we're talking about the commitment of many lifetimes. So partly we have to understand. Now also bear in mind, and this is also very important, God reads the heart. And there's a wonderful concept in India, which I myself, I feel, have lived through, which is called Upaguru. And an Upaguru could be a Satguru. Now a Satguru is a fully realized master. I mean, because the word guru is used sometimes like you could have your tabla playing guru or your violin guru, because it's a teacher relationship that's deeper than just I take lessons. It's that that teacher is actually molding your consciousness. And so especially in the study of Indian music, where it's so much about consciousness as well as technical skill, when you have your music guru, he's molding your consciousness as well as molding your ability to play. And sometimes that guru is also your spiritual guru, literally, because it just becomes one relationship. But a Satguru is a fully God-realized master, or a Jivan Mukta, or a soul with the capacity to bring you to a high state of God realization. You don't have to be an avatar to be a guru. You have to have a high state. And even, just to make it a little more confusing, that relationship would begin even before the guru is a Satguru himself. I remember having that conversation with Swamiji in the 70s in a taxi cab in New York. Just oddly, that just happened to be where we were. And we were having this conversation about his role, his position in our lives. And that's when he told me, Master told me I would have spiritual responsibility for people. And I was speaking to him honestly about, that because all I knew about Master was from him, Swamiji, it was hard for me to go around him to be dedicated to Master because that wasn't how I was learning. And Swami said what he often said at that time, that, well, he wasn't, essentially he sort of said, Master is qualified to be a guru. Master has more to give you than I have to give you. Later in his life, Swami actually shifted that. So I think at that time he was holding that at bay because of something else he said to me in that taxi cab, which is, I've always thought, these were Swami's words, I've always thought I could do more for people in the role of simple, unaffected friend than in any other role. What was interesting in that conversation in the taxi cab was that he never repudiated that Master told him he would have spiritual responsibility. What he told me was how he wanted to carry that out. And so I listened to him because, of course, that was my job in life, was to listen to him. So if he told me that's the role he wanted, then I accepted that. He could have told me that he was going to play the role of a pink elephant, and I would have accepted that. Show me who it is, Lord, and I'll worship him. But then I also said to him, but Swamiji, this is the relationship, of a disciple to her teacher or guru, or however it progresses. This is a relationship that is formed over many, many lifetimes. And one looks around with common sense, and you see that there's many coteries of people, many little cohorts, in which there is an established leader. And that leader has magnetism. And it's not just spiritual, it's like in any field, whether it's music or rodeo, there's just, and there are these old relationships of mentor and student. And so it seems self-evident to me that the relationships would start forming before it really reaches the level of Satguru and disciple. Swami's answer was, of course. Because everything in this world is a manifestation of the highest level. Of course. These are very, very old relationships. Oh yes, Upaguru. But there is still this concept called Satguru, which is a person of sufficient realization to be able to lift you to God. And this is, again, very subtle. Swami talks about it in the Bhagavad Gita commentary and in many other places, that you don't have to be an avatar to be a Satguru. You just have to have a state of realization which Master told Swamiji he had. So there you have it. But you can see I'm talking a lot about Swamiji because, I don't know, it's my job to do so. Whenever I talk about Guru, I have to talk about Swami because I don't understand it except as I understand him. He's my example. But before I came to Master, I was introduced to self-realization through Swami Vivekananda, and his Guru is Sri Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna is a great avatar who lived in the 1800s, and I believe he passed away just before Master was born, so their lives didn't quite cross. But Master was very devoted to Master Mahashaya, who was a direct disciple of Ramakrishna. And it's the blissful devotee. It's in Autobiography of a Yogi. And Master was so devoted to Master Mahashaya that Master Mahashaya had to say to Master, I'm not your guru will come later. But that gives you an idea of how close they were. So you see, it's not as clear cut as we sometimes think it is. And so I became very devoted to Ramakrishna for several years. I started on that path just before I turned 19, and I met Swami when I was 22. So there was 3 very devoted years in there before I met Swami. And also during that time, I became very devoted to St. Francis. And I profoundly felt the intercession of both Ramakrishna and St. Francis in my life. They were guiding and taking care of me, there's no question. I never took any kind of initiations, it never crossed my mind. It wasn't that I didn't want to, it's just it never occurred to me to do it. The opportunity was not in front of me. There was no organizational context in which I could have done that. I was so devoted to Ramakrishna, you should know, that when I met Swamiji, and even after I moved to Ananda, by now it's 1971, and just before I turned 24, that I really was concerned because I felt like Ramakrishna had guided me so profoundly, and now I was accepting another path. And there was no question of accepting Swami as a guru. It had to be Master. So I had Master and Ramakrishna like this, both Paramhansas, both equal. I can't say one was better than the other. But through Swamiji, I was going to need to be devoted to Master because that was what the path he was on. And I knew I needed to be where Swami was, but I just didn't know. I didn't know where Master fit into it. I didn't know what to do about Ramakrishna. So this is what I realized. The reason I can't sort this out is because I don't have the intuition to be able to perceive clearly. I will never develop the intuition if I just sit here waiting for the intuition before I make the decision. So I know that Swami has what I want, and I am going to follow Swami because I know he's going to take me wherever I need to go. I know that's a fact. So I will do that. And this other confusion I will just put on a shelf. So for approximately a year of time, during which Swami gave me Kriya initiation, and in that sense I took a discipleship initiation, but to be perfectly frank, I wasn't that clear about anything. And there was just this question of Ramakrishna and Master just floating up in the ether. And literally, I woke up one morning, and it said, I say it because it was like a voice, although it wasn't audible externally. And the voice said, of course you belong to this path, meaning Master and Swamiji. And, and Ramakrishna was fine with that. There was no issue. And then I later learned about Upaguru, which is a true guru who will take care of you until you are sufficiently clear for you to know where you really belong. And in that way, you're not repudiating or abandoning or being disloyal. You're just following the path as it's laid out in front of you. And so that also goes here. I come before you having long sought this, having followed a long winding path. Now, this is not just talking about this lifetime. I mean, some people don't follow a winding path at all. I've been doing a series of interviews with millennials, conversations with millennials, the whole next generation of Ananda. By the time I'm done with this, which is like another month from now, I'll have talked to close to 50 wonderful, absolutely wonderful souls. And quite a number of them were born into this path. And just, there were always pictures of Master. There was never any question in my mind. Or people who saw a picture of Master, and that was that. So there wasn't any long winding path, apparently, in this lifetime. But it takes many lifetimes before we develop the clarity of mind and also the humility. The humility to recognize, you see, because there's also this paradoxical thing about coming to discipleship, which is, the Maya of this world is very intense, and it's extremely convincing. So it takes a very powerful and creative concentration of one's own consciousness to be able to see through the Maya and realize that there's a whole other cosmic drama going on here, which is my soul's realization of God. And that all of this is just the background for that journey. And so, in order even to come to the spiritual path, and also even to go back before that, the spiritual path, because it requires the transcendence of so much that the human being desires, people don't come to the path of self-realization until they've had a certain amount of fulfillment in the world. So that's why you see on the path of self-realization, you don't see a lot of underprivileged, impoverished people, because they're still striving to get and to try out what this world offers. What you see is people who have, at least to a certain extent, been able to experience what this world has to offer, have recognized its limitations, and are now being driven to seek something more. So to be at that point requires a certain amount of ego strength. The ego has to be developed to the point where it has the power to focus its attention and get what it wants. Because if you think you're just going to skip it, there's a famous conversation between Ramakrishna and a disciple who a man comes and says, I've lost my job, I've lost my home, my family has rejected me, I want to become a renunciate. And Ramakrishna said, you haven't renounced the world has renounced you. So sometimes people who have been rejected by the world and disappointed, they still desire all those things, but not having them, they'll come and try to sort of give it to God, but you don't even own it yet. And you can't give yourself to God unless you have some degree of mastery over yourself. So we develop a certain amount of strength. Now, Swami's story is perfect in this, because he was a very powerful young man with tremendous confidence in his own abilities and his own thoughts. Not arrogant, but just the fact was he was an exceptionally focused and powerful and brilliant man. And he had never met anyone. As he himself said, when he said to Master, I want to be your disciple, he said, 2 weeks earlier, before he found Autobiography of a Yogi, he could never imagine saying those words to anyone, just because he never met anyone who he felt could give him more than he could find on his own. But when he saw it, he didn't hesitate. So that's part of the long, winding path. We have to develop ourselves. We have to have the fruit of that development. We have to drink that cup and find out how much it does and doesn't give us. And then we begin to have to realize that I need to transcend these limitations that were my virtues up until this point. And then we have to realize I can't do that on my own. Now that's a lot of steps, isn't it? And that's a lot of steps before we even encounter the possibility of a guru. What to speak of the willingness then to put ourselves into his hands. All right, now I'm going to change the energy just a little bit by asking Keshava to sing 2 more chants for us, and we'll have a moment of meditation, and then we'll go on with what we're talking about.
the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait to see only you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire. Just for just you. My Lord, I want to see only just you. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait to see only just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire. Just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. In the valley of sorrow 1,000 years or till tomorrow. But I'll wait to see only you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire. My heart's aflame, my soul's afire. Just for you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you. My Lord, I want to see only you, just you, just you, just you. this sleep, Lord, will you wake me? From this dream, Lord, will you wake me? In thee I dive, in thee I rise, in thee I dive, in thee I rise, in thy sea. In thy sea, in thee. From this sleep, Lord, will you wake me? From this dream, Lord, will you wake me? In thee I'm born, in thee I die, in thee I'm born, in thee I die, to live forever. In thee, to live forever. In thee. From this sleep, Lord, will you wake me? From this dream, Lord, will you wake me? In thee I dive, in thee I rise, in thee I dive, in thee I rise, in thy sea. In thee, in thy sea. In thee. From this sleep, Lord, will you wake me? From this dream, Lord, will you wake me? In thee I'm born, in thee I die, in thee I'm born, in thee I die, to live forever. In thee, to live forever. In thee, to live forever. In thee, to live forever. In thee. From this sleep, Lord, will you wake me? From this dream, Lord, will you wake me?
Let's meditate now for just a few minutes. Om, peace. Amen. I'm not going to get more than a few paragraphs through this vow, so we'll try to put it as I think we can put it as a PDF attached to this recording. It won't be hard to do. Okay. So the next paragraph of this vow is everything I was saying just a few minutes ago. I have walked with my own strength, all too seldom with thine. I have walked with the thought, I want this from life, these answers, that guidance, this pathway or that. But I have seen that as often as I presumed on thy will, it turned away from me. That's a very subtle paragraph there. And this is what I was talking about. And this is one of the dilemmas that happens to us when we become a disciple. When we become a devotee altogether. I was speaking earlier about we have to have a highly developed, integrated ego. Because you have to, as I was saying before, you have to own yourself before you can offer yourself. And I've seen even among devotees, we'll come to the path thinking that we're going to be allowed to avoid having to deal with something that we don't want to have to deal with. Maybe some psychological trauma from early in our lives, some desires that embarrass us but compel us, and that we're ashamed of wanting to have to deal with them. Just countless things. It could be countless things. And we're hoping that I can just offer the whole bundle to God and God will take care of it. Now, there is a certain amount of truth to that, but there also has to be, what I say is you have to own yourself before you can give yourself away. You can't take the money out of someone else's wallet and call it a generous donation. So we have to own yourself, which is not that you have to have mastered yourself, but we have to be unafraid of who we are. And to be unafraid of who we are means we have to be able to just look calmly and quietly. I've walked with my own strength, all too seldom with thine. And here's what I was starting to say. That which is a virtue, which is this self-contained, self-directed power, which is exceedingly admirable and absolutely necessary for success in the world, then has to be elevated to where that same willpower is used not to assert what I want, but to attune myself to what is happening inside. I mean, the way I have seen this manifested in my own life as I have worked and continue to work, to thread this needle, is that sometimes I've had to use all my willpower to do nothing, to just hold myself still, which actually do nothing is the wrong word, to take no external action, even though everything in me was screaming to get involved and do something and make something happen, when in fact I could tell that all of my impulses were just myself wanting something to happen. And I was presuming on God's will because I wanted, you must want it. That's what is put here. But I've seen that as often as I presumed on thy will, it turned away from me, meaning that which I truly wanted, which was divine attunement and fulfillment, didn't come to me. And presumption is because I feel it so strongly, it must be what should happen. Or many lifetimes where we never even stop to ask whether this is really higher guidance or just guidance. When I've taught classes, which I've done many, on how to know and trust your inner guidance, one of the most important points about inner guidance is that we have many inner voices. And at the beginning of delineating ourselves as a distinct human being with my own willpower and my own trajectory to follow, we first have to just separate ourselves from everybody else's opinion, from what our parents expect of us, from what fashion expects of us, from what our peer group expects of us, from what, habitually my subconscious fears expect of me. We have all these different voices playing in our heads. I remember when I was about 15, younger than that a little, and I realized that the very way I dressed was completely dictated by somebody else because it was the only thing I could buy. I mean, I also sewed clothes, but I didn't make all my own. When I went out shopping, I only had so many choices. I couldn't look like someone from, Henry V's court. I couldn't look like a disciple of Jesus from that period of time. I could only look like a girl of my particular realm. And who was making that decision? Who was telling me that this is how I'm supposed to look? And it was just the beginning of realizing how many expectations were dictated rather than chosen. And I began at a very young age to try to define myself for myself. Then the hippie movement came at just the right time for me, and I was able to sort of head off in that. But that, of course, had its own groupthink that was also imposed upon it. But all those different voices often speak with great determination, and at the beginning of our awakening, this winding path, we awaken first to just my egoic preferences. And my egoic preferences are a step up from just letting the world around me tell me who I'm supposed to be. And sometimes we have to assert those egoic preferences with a lot of strength against great opposition, and it's a victory to do that. But then we reach the point where I have walked with my own strength, all too seldom with thine. I have thought, I want this answers, this pathway, this guidance or that. We're dictating to the divine and not actually able to tell the difference that clearly. But as often as I presumed on thy will and just assumed that because I want it, you want it, we don't find what we're really looking for. It eludes us. Then Swami skips. Too long, mother, the vow says, have I sought thee for myself, not for thy love. That's a very subtle, I've thought about that a lot, and I'm not really quite sure I can explain it, but sought thee for myself, for the gratification of the desires I've set in front of me. Because, see, anyone who moves with power through this world is to a very large extent drawing on the divine force, because there is only one power in this world. And that's why you see people who are very egoic, but also very, very powerful in the world. And it's interesting, Ramakrishna made a statement in this context. At the time that he lived, being on the stage, being an actress, especially for women, it was okay for men, but for women, being an actress on the stage was considered a very low profession, because there you were standing in front of people, people were looking at you. There were just lots of reasons why it was not something that a high caste woman would do. And often men played the women's parts and so on. But one of Ramakrishna's most devoted disciples was this man named Girish Ghosh, who became a very famous Bengali playwright. And in fact, he's considered to be, as I understand it, the father of Bengali theater. Calcutta was, and I believe to a certain extent still is, a great center of art, artistic expression in all of India. And at that time, in the late 1800s, it was. And Girish was a huge, sort of larger-than-life figure, almost a caricature of the artist. He was a libertine and self-indulgent in many different ways, but he was also a great artist, and he was also, as a playwright and an actor, and he was also a great disciple of Ramakrishna. And in order to produce his plays, and he wanted women on the stage, he lifted women from even lower positions, servants or even prostitutes, who were already outside of society, but that being the only way they could not starve. So he brought them into the theater and taught them acting, and many of them became quite good, but it was still considered a low-caste profession. Girish was so enthusiastic about Ramakrishna. He was one of the first to proclaim Ramakrishna to be an avatar. And so he played a very important role, and Ramakrishna would dispute with him about whether or not he was an avatar, and Girish would insist. This is all in the Gospel of Ramakrishna, just wonderful, wonderful things. So Girish would bring his acting troupe and his musicians and so on out to meet Ramakrishna, because he wanted everyone to meet Ramakrishna. And the plays all had spiritual themes, so it was all marvelously rich. Period. Many of the people around Ramakrishna were very strict adherents to caste, and Ramakrishna himself was of the Brahmin caste, and there was a lot that would happen in the temple that was strictly by caste guidelines. So Girish bringing in this whole crew of non-caste people, outcasts really, or people who are not conforming at all to the caste strictures, and that Ramakrishna as a high caste person would consort with them without any restraint, was for many of the more narrow-minded, it was quite a scandal. So after one of these visits was there, someone came in to reprimand Ramakrishna for breaking the caste rules, because after all, he was a priest of this temple, and what kind of an example was he setting? And then Ramakrishna talked about the wonderfulness of these actors and singers and dancers. And this was the beautiful phrase he used for them. He said, right now, the God they worship is music and art. But then with great, an ecstatic look toward heaven, Ramakrishna said, the God they worship now is music and art, but they know how to worship. And then he said, when they waken, to Divine Mother, he said, you will see they will streak ahead of many of you, because they know how to worship. So there is this long, winding path that we all follow, where we learn how to worship. And if what we worship is God, is the God of money, or the God of power, or the God of beauty, or fashion, or success, or family, or home, or whatever, but we have to learn how to worship. We have to learn how to concentrate our attention and have enough willpower to break the hypnosis of Maya, to move through and create a reality of our own. That is the necessary beginning. It's not that we have to be millionaires or anything like that, but we have to own ourselves sufficiently to be able to offer it to God. We have to have tested this world enough so that we're not renouncing it because we're afraid of it. You see? We can't be renouncing it because it has renounced us. But then we realize that that was presumption, that there's something else I was meant to do. All too often, oh Mother. And Swami immediately turns it into devotion at this point. Oh Mother. So he's turning us. So this lament is not self-justification. This is us, and this is what we suddenly see in this vow. Oh, we're sitting at the feet of Divine Mother. Oh, Divine Mother, I have wandered so far from you. Divine Mother, and this is how this starts. After the invocation to the Masters, it starts, Divine Mother. Divine Mother, I come before thee today, having long sought thy eternal light, long pondered these truths, long gone through the winding trails, but I've walked with my own strength. I've dictated to life, I've dictated to the world, but I have used my power to get it. But I was presuming, and now I'm throwing myself at your feet. Ah, too long, Mother, have I acted only for my own interests, and now what I want is your love. And what Swami's skipping over there is the realization that all the fulfillment that we were seeking in all these other ways was just the heart's absolute loneliness and longing for Divine Mother's love. Just think about how little children are and how little children are with their mother. You get separated from Mother and you put your arms out and you run to her. The mother puts the baby down to sleep in the other room, but as soon as the baby awakes and begins to call, the baby thinks she's alone or he's alone, calls to Mother, and Mother rushes in and takes her in. It's just that personification symbolically in human life. That's us. We are Mother's little baby. And in just the same way that the child knows that where I must be is surrounded by my Mother's love to be safe, the devotee, after the long winding path and many lifetimes of presumption, realizes that if I'm just searching for myself, it doesn't work. What I need is your love. And also you see the humility involved in that. I mean, that is such a reversion to childlike helplessness, you know? And we've spent all our lives, incarnations, proving that we can do it on our own, and all of a sudden we're back at our mother's feet saying, all I want is your love. That's a long journey to come to that. But that is the attitude of a disciple. And this is the way Swami talks about it too. He had come to understand that he simply could not have the only thing he wanted to have, which was true inner peace and the true experience of true fulfillment without the help of the master. It's like, I've reached the end of what I can do on my own, and now I throw myself at your feet. So then the disciple says, I know now that without thy strength, and this is important, added to my own, infusing it, I shall never find thee. For thine is the power, the grace, and the infinite glory. So it's not as if we actually abandon all that we have become through our own efforts. But we realize that unless I transcend this self-definition as ego, where I need to go from here, I cannot go on my own. Without thy strength added to mine, infusing it, I shall never find thee. So this is when the Swami says, I can't tell where my thoughts end and Master's begin. I can't tell where Master ends and I begin, Swami said at the end of his life. It's just that I know I'm still here, but your strength has so infused me that I can't find the dividing line between us. A vow that we take is not a statement of what we have accomplished. It's a statement of the commitment to what we're going to accomplish. And again, Swamiji is explaining to us why we would take this and what our state of mind is. People would take this vow, but do we really deeply go into our hearts and really meditate on what these words mean? For thine is the power, the grace, and the infinite glory. It's self-realization is self-forgetfulness, just self-transcendence. The Yogananda made the statement, I killed Yogananda long ago. No one dwells in this temple now but God. And when he was being praised for his humility, he said, how can there be humility when there is no sense of self? We think of humility as like we take who we are and then we're soft with it. We don't assert it. We recognize its limitations. Master took it an entire dimension beyond that. There's no self to be humble because there's simply no self. So Divine Mother's strength infusing it, we then suddenly realize that this is what I was saying also at the beginning. When it's an act of true creativity, we're the instrument for it. When the Master stands before us, even though there's an apparent physical body, there's no egoic I within that body. That's what it is to be a Jivan Mukta. A Jivan Mukta is there's no sense of ego anymore. Actions happen, energy passes through, residual karma is still acting it out, but the individual through whom it is passing has no sense of personal identification with it. When a very great yogi went through a very difficult time in his life, a contemporary yogi, a friend of his characterized it, it was not so much that the Master was having a hard time, is that a hard time was going through him. It was a very interesting way to think about it. It's a beautiful image even for our whole lives, that a hard time is going through me. It's not that I'm having one, it's that it's going through me. Because it's just the divine flow of energy, it's the karma that has to flow through me, but why do I have to call it myself? So we start with God infusing us. But then, as a disciple, we still have to act. Swami talks about how he ran the experiment. He had been told as a minister that he should allow God to speak through him. So he was in the midst of giving a sermon, and it occurred to him that he should allow God to speak through him. So he went silent. And he's standing up there, giving a talk to 100 people in a room. He simply stopped speaking. And he said he stopped speaking for like 2 full minutes, just waiting for God to speak. And God didn't. And then Swami realized that he had to activate the flow of energy. But it was God's energy infusing it. For thine is the power, the grace, and the infinite glory. So now the devotee says, with loving faith now I seek thee through the ray of thy light that thou hast offered me. And this is then a recognition that God has a plan, and I feel myself to be part of that plan. It's not so much that I have shopped around and found my guru, it's that you have brought the guru to me. Swamiji would often say, when the disciple is ready, the guru will come. You don't have to go out seeking him. When your magnetism is there and is right, it will come. In these conversations with millennials that I've been doing, I ask them, when did Master first enter your life? How did he find you? And the stories are just remarkable about how when enough had happened that soul was ready, then all of a sudden it was there. Swami, there's this wonderful story of Swami giving this lecture once. He was in Los Angeles. This story is in my book, I believe, Swami Kriyananda, as we have known him. He was speaking at a very popular venue then. I don't know if it's still there or not. It's called the Bodhi Tree. And it was a bookstore, a very popular metaphysical bookstore. And the way the store was decorated, sort of on a higher level above the bookshelves, closer to the ceiling, there were big portraits of many, many spiritual teachers, contemporary and ancient both. And Swami was giving a lecture, and it was very popular, and it was a very full room. And this young man came in, and all the seats were filled, and so he just took a seat toward the back with his back up against the wall, and he was just sitting there listening. And then Swami was talking, the subject was discipleship and the guru-disciple. And Swami was talking about the fact that you don't have to go out searching for a guru. When you're ready, when your consciousness is ready to receive the guru, then the guru will come to you. And just for no apparent reason, it turns out that the man had seated himself under a picture of Satya Sai Baba, who was living at that time in India and was a very popular spiritual master. And the picture of Satya Sai Baba fell off the wall. There was no earthquake, there was no change in the room. When Swami said that, you don't have to go looking for the guru will find you. The picture fell off the wall, flipped itself around, landed upright in the man's lap. And all of a sudden, those words are spoken, and he's looking at Satya Sai Baba. Now, it turns out this man had come because he specifically was trying to decide, because he felt powerfully drawn to Satya Sai Baba. He was trying to make the decision as to whether or not he would go to India to meet him. And he was afraid. The primary reason he was afraid is he was afraid he would be disappointed, that somehow this aspiration would not end in fulfillment. And he just couldn't overcome his fear, and he couldn't decide. Swami says that the picture lands in his lap. The man gathers up the picture and holds it to his heart, and of course went to India after that to meet him. No, we didn't follow the rest of his journey. But imagine that. But experiences no less dramatic may have happened to many of you who are watching this, and happened to many of us just at the moment when it was time, when we were ready. And so the key to finding your guru is not to run around looking for your guru. The key to finding the guru is to become capable of being a disciple. Because guru can pass in front of you many times. If we're not ready to say, I want to be your disciple, if we haven't reached the point that Swami describes so poignantly in his autobiography of having pushed his own power to the limit, and realize that without your energy infusing me, I have sought thee too long only for myself. Now, Mother, all I want is your love. I'm done. I'm done with finding my own way and making it work my own way. Now, I just want your love. I just want to be in your vibration, because without your strength, I will never find what I seek. So now, with loving faith now, and see, how did we come to that loving faith? Through experience. You know, to become a disciple, we've had a lot of experience. This is not the beginning of our spiritual life. This is the culmination of many, many, many lifetimes of effort. So now, I not only have faith, but I have loving faith. My heart is open. In the Purification Ceremony, we say, the Master says, open your heart to me, and I will enter and take charge of your life. Whoa, that's a lot, isn't it? So we have to have that loving faith that is heart-centered, not just some kind of like an analysis of the pros and cons of being a disciple and deciding there's more advantages than disadvantages. No, it's with loving faith. You know, what makes the baby just cry out, "Mother, mother, mother," because the baby knows that mother's there. Or in the devotee's case, the devotee knows that God is always there. I have faith, and that faith is a loving faith. It's a trusting faith. And then I will seek thee through the ray of light that thou hast offered me. This is where I was talking back at the beginning. Divine Mother put Swami Kriyananda in front of me and put in front of me the recognition that this was my pole star. This was my pathway to what I was seeking. I didn't know where Master fit into it. I didn't know what to do about Ramakrishna. I didn't know any of that. I knew this much, but I knew it completely. And I knew if I followed, if I acted on what was given to me, then more clarity and more would be given to me. By the ray of thy light that thou hast offered me. You know, it's the law of prosperity, to accept with gratitude, you know, that which is given to us instead of picking and choosing. And then also to utilize fully that which is given to you. I know when, you know, I had different responsibilities for different projects at Ananda, and we were always operating on a budget of less than nothing. You know, it was very important to me that before we bought something new, we had to be fully utilizing what we already had. It couldn't be just a question of tossing this aside because I'm restless and I want something else. We need to really have used what we have, and now we understand that something would be better, and therefore we should go ahead and buy that. I don't mean to an absurd extreme degree, but when we fritter away the resources that we have because something over there looks more attractive to us, why would God waste his resources on us? So I will seek God through the ray of thy light that thou hast offered me. I will trust you. I'm acting with loving faith. You have brought me to this point. And this is also an important part, because sometimes when a person takes even a vow like this, it's partly knowledge and it's partly an affirmation that as far as I can see, this is what I should do. And I'm acting with loving faith that you're going to take care of me because you've brought me to this point and this is what I'm going to do. We can't have more confidence than that because we don't have pure intuition yet. So we have to act according to the best that we know. That's what I was talking about when I came to Ananda. And then we say, I will ascend to thee, not by my power alone, but by the power of thy infinite love. And Swamiji brings this relationship back repeatedly to the word love, loving faith. Now I seek thee for thy love, and thy power is the power of love. Because love is what motivates us. Sri Yukteswar, as jnanic as he was in his The Holy Science, which is not a book that I know well, but at the end he just speaks of you can't put one foot in front of the other on the spiritual path without love. Because love is what draws us. And it doesn't, I don't just mean romantic love or emotional love. It can be love of wisdom. it can be love of bliss, but that we're drawn to something. I had to give a class once on devotion. And the way it ended up coming out was devotion means to be devoted to. So when we talk about ourselves being a devotee, that doesn't just mean that we clang the bells and chant and dance to Krishna or something like that. It means that we are devoted. And we become devoted because we love it. That's what gives us the power to be devoted. A man is devoted to his children. A person is devoted to their work. A woman can be devoted to her beautiful home. We can be devoted to developing our careers, but we're devoted to it because we love it. We're drawn to it. And that's where the power comes from. And then the vow just has this wonderful declaration, I am thine, mother. So we've just come to this. It's been a long, winding route. I've learned a lot of tough lessons. Here I am thine, mother. And then the request, be thou eternally mine. And this is the loving interplay. It's because Divine Mother is always ours forever. But I'm offering you my heart, and I want your heart in return. And we have a right to say this. How often do little children say, I'm never leaving you? Or the little boy says, I'm going to marry you, Mommy, and we're going to live together forever. But it's the loving play. And the mother will say, yes, dear, of course. She won't explain that's not possible. It won't happen that way, because it's the loving interplay. And so, I am thine, mother. Be thou eternally mine. That's what the vow of discipleship is. And it's interesting also, we've invoked the gurus, but this is all with Divine Mother, because the guru is the window. It's what we learn, what we get by unifying with the guru, is we get the guru's consciousness. And the guru's consciousness is not of himself. The guru's consciousness is of the infinite. So even in our discipleship vow, it's our relationship with Divine Mother, because we know that's where Guru is taking us. Then again comes our commitment. I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause. I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause. I often make that a prayer. And I often say, your cause of self-realization for all, because that is all that that's all that Divine Mother wants. She wants us all to be free. I offer myself in these two words, service, which is, this commitment as a disciple is not passive. I am embracing the Guru's reality as my own reality. In the Bible, there's this wonderful passage toward the end of Jesus' life when he says to his disciples, I'm paraphrasing, but this is the sense of it, because one of the disciples says something and calls him master, because that's how they called Jesus. And then Jesus says to his disciple, you call me master, but I call you friend. And then Jesus explains, and I'm going to put Master's explanation in here first. Master also makes a point about friendship with God, because he said the relationship of friend is the purest kind of relationship, because there's no coercion to it. He said, you're a friend by your own free will, by the affinity of your heart. He said, even mother love, which is utterly self-sacrificing, where literally the mother gives her own body, which is to say her own life, to even create the body of the child. There's a coercive element. Once the baby is conceived, the baby will grow. Whether or not the mother wants it to happen, it will grow. Once the child is born, the mother must care for the child or the child won't live. Now those services can be offered with free will, but there's still a defined reality. Friend is pure. It's completely chosen. And of course, friend is also a relationship of equals, which ultimately, you see, that's what the disciple becomes. He becomes equal to the guru. And the guru is not satisfied until the guru's job is not done until the disciple becomes equal to the master. So Jesus says, you call me master, but I call you friend. And then he refers to master in terms of servant and master. He said the servant, and in many ways it could also apply to the disciple, he said carries out the master's business, but the servant knows that his home is elsewhere. And even though he may act as if the master's home is his own, and the master's concerns are his own, he always has his own home somewhere else. But the friend assumes with equal fervor, whatever belongs to the friend belongs to me. Whatever concerns the friends have, I will take them on as my own. And so this is where I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause. I'm not just a child here taking from my Father. I'm not just seeking for myself. I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause. This was a gradual process that I had to come to when I first came to Swamiji, because I had fallen into this world is just a dream, and so we really shouldn't put out much energy in it. Not that I didn't put out energy, because I enjoyed putting out energy. So I wasn't lazy or tamasic in that sense. But I refused to consider anything of this world of importance, because I thought that was the proper spiritual attitude. And I was there with Swami, but I was really seeking him for myself. I was with Swamiji because I knew he could give me the keys to happiness, because what I loved was bliss. What I loved was happiness and wisdom. That's really what I was looking for. And I knew Swami could give it to me, but I was seeking it for myself. I didn't realize that, but that was the truth. But then I began to watch that Swami was completely devoted to the cause of building Ananda. And he was devoted to it because it was what Master had wanted to have happen. So Swami was acting according to this, with service and devotion to his Guru's cause. I was devoted to Swamiji, but I was not devoted to Swamiji's cause, because I was holding myself aloof from it. And I realized, because the relationship I had with Swamiji was that of friends, that I wasn't being a very good friend to him. I mean, it's not a very good friend when you have a huge project in front of you and you have all these boxes to move, and the friend just comes over and reads a book while you're carrying the boxes. I mean, you don't consider that person to be a real friend of yours. Your friend is the one who walks in and stands next to you and moves all those boxes until they're all done. And I was just letting Swami carry all the boxes of building Ananda, and I was basically sitting there reading my book. And we didn't have this vow and these words at that time, but I could tell there was something really wrong with that. And I remembered, well, at that time I wasn't thinking about guru-disciple so much as just friend. He was my friend. And he was a true and selfless friend to me, but I was not being a friend to him. So I often pray, I offer myself in service and devotion to your cause, which I define as the cause of self-realization for all. And that's a very important part of the disciple's vow. How you exercise that service becomes a decision you have to make for yourself. But there has to always be, this is fundamental to discipleship. And then in service and devotion to your cause, which is your manifestation in this world, and to the ray of the divine light as it is represented by your channels. And then we again name all the gurus: Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Sri Yukteswar, and Paramhansa Yogananda. So the service and devotion to the cause for which you were born, and also to the ray of light. Because now we have to focus. If we're going to be disciples, this is not just one more initiation that we're collecting. Because true transformation comes from attunement. And attunement is a whole nother subject. This whole 2 hours could have been about attunement, but it's turned out to be something else. Attunement is when we align our consciousness with the vibration of the Master. And that's why we have to transcend ourselves, because all of that egoic self-definition, egoic preoccupation, seeking it for myself, is contrary to the way the Master lived in this world, and therefore we're not in alignment with his vibration. So in service and devotion to the ray of the divine light as it is represented by your channels, and this is also to keep us from being lost in abstraction, because the human mind will just sort of make up its own thing. So it has to be very, very focused here. Jesus Christ, Babaji, Lahiri, Sri Yukteswar, Paramhansa Yogananda. Every year, right around Guru Purnima, which is the full moon in July, for the last 25 years, we've had a what we call the Guru Day retreat. And we have shrines in the courtyard of our community here, shrines to each of these masters, and we decorate those shrines and we sit before each one and we attune ourselves to the vibration of that master, and then we offer a candle in service and devotion to that master to attune ourselves to the ray of light of that particular guru. Because attuning ourselves to each one of it, and they were real, they were true, concrete, specific windows onto the divine. And over the many years, many of these talks you can find them on the internet, but each one of these masters has a specific aspect of the diamond of God realization to offer us. And we attune ourselves to each one, and by gathering together and looking out the window of each one on the same divine light, we become stronger and stronger in our own capacity to live in that light. So again, this is not a generalized commitment to God. This is a very specific, we are now disciples. And we now must accept the conditions of our discipleship as these masters have presented them to us, which is this line of gurus, to the ray of the divine light as it is manifested. And then we say, accept me into this family of self-realization, which is just a beautiful phrase. May I be part of this family of self-realization in the path, at the end of the path. Swami talks about these great spiritual beings who generate this magnetism over eons of time through multiple incarnations as they come back again and again to help us as disciples, and how this great magnetic force of spiritual understanding begins to develop, and how seeking souls are drawn into it. And we gradually create this family of self-realization. And Swamiji also says that our realization comes not only from attuning ourselves to God, but also by harmonizing our relationships with one another. So when we become part of this family of self-realization, it's not only us and the masters, but it's also the way that we help each other, the way we help each other as friends, and also the way we gradually refine our own understanding, sometimes by harmony and sometimes by friction. As Swamiji said, this is a very old spiritual family, he said, and we have been all things to each other, which means both positive and negative. And as Swami says, part of our freedom in God comes as we learn to harmonize our relationships with one another, because that is harmonizing ourselves with the objective world. And when through that harmony also, that's integral to our harmony with God. So we have this family of self-realization, and beautifully, many people are drawn to become disciples, not only because of their attraction to the Guru, but because they feel they belong to this family. And the story often is, I saw all the people of Ananda, and I realized that I wanted to be one. I wanted to be that kind of person. Or I recognized them as my brothers and sisters. Sometimes we have prayed, Divine Mother, send to us, those brothers and sisters who belong to this family. Increase, we have room in our hearts for all of them, bring them to us. And that's part of our devotion to this cause, because we say, and make me also through them, through the family itself, an instrument of thy blessing. Thus as I receive, may others be blessed also to receive. And that's what it means to be a disciple, isn't it? To give ourselves to Divine Mother, to attune ourselves to this ray, to devote ourselves to this ray of light that has been sent to us, to be part of this family and to bless others as we ourselves are blessed. God bless you.